Lastly, I'm delighted to invite a leading cybersecurity trailblazer for this final session. Get ready to hear how she has overcome security challenges and take note of her guiding philosophies on business resilience that have led her to security success. Without further ado, I'm honored to introduce our last session, Security Philosophies from Trailblazers, Q&A with Helen Patton, Advisory CISO at Cisco, and hosted by Josh Yavor, CISO at Tessian.
Thank you, Stacia, and hello, everyone. I'm Josh Yavor, Chief Information Security Officer here at Tessian, and I'm thrilled to welcome Helen Patton to our virtual stage today. Helen is a security and privacy legend with an extensive career across the public and private sectors. I had the pleasure of working with Helen at Cisco and can advocate firsthand to her leadership and the delightful experience of working with her. Helen, welcome, and thank you so much again for being here today.
Josh, it's lovely to see you again. Thanks for having me.
Wonderful. Let's dive right in. I really want to talk about good security baselines with you to start today. So from your perspective, how would you describe what a good baseline security or a baseline is for security for organizations in light of the issues that they face today in 2022?
Yeah, it's really tempting, I think, for organizations to look at the threats that we're facing, supply chain or ransomware or whatever, and want to deal with those things like head on. But the reality is, I think that there's a few things that have to happen before that. I think we need to think about the compliance of the industry that you're in. There's going to be regulators or external auditors or customers who have expectations around how you handle data and how you manage your systems. So compliance is the first place where I would start, but then compliance doesn't equal security. I recognize that too. So I would then go very quickly into what are good basic cyber hygiene activities. What are the things that are going to help you regardless of the threat or regardless of the issue of the day? And they're things like good asset management, multi-factor authentication, vulnerability management, incident response capabilities. So all of those things are really hard to do well. If you haven't even begun, that's a place definitely to start. And all of those things combined are going to help you deal with whatever the threats of the day are. So that's how I talk to my customers about that. And that's how I think about it for my own programs too.
That's great. And I'm also a big fan of the saying that, the best security practices and privacy practices are the ones that you would do even if there were no regulations or laws or contractual agreements with customers and so on. Just fundamentally the right things to do. So what's the best way for any organization to get started in assessing their current status against those good practices and maintain an ongoing sense of ongoing assessment, reassessment for those outcomes?
Yeah, I would definitely start with talking to people inside the company. Most people know what's working and what's not working. So spending some time talking to the other security members of the team or the other IT members of the team or risk, compliance, legal, operations folks, everyone is going to know what's working and what's not. And so you don't have to spend a year doing a full-blown assessment to be able to begin the work of knowing where you need to be putting things in place. So I would start there. I do think from a leadership perspective, though, there is a role to play for bringing in an external assessor to give you an outside-in view as well. So bringing in an external auditor or a consulting firm who's going to come in and take a look at your environment and give you some ways of thinking about leapfrogging to the place you need to be can be a really useful place to start as well. But I wouldn't start with that external view first. I'd start with talking to people who do the jobs day in and day out as the primary source of your information.
The real subject matter experts, right?
Yes, absolutely.
So I think one of the challenges is always maintaining a balance as we're looking at things like these internal and third-party provided assessment processes in balancing being proactive and reactive, because we need to, it's always a balance. We're never just one or the other. what are some recommendations that you might have or approaches that work best for organizations as they're trying to align to the right practices and outcomes, but have that balance of proactive and reactive needs that they need to address?
Yeah, I can't talk about being proactive or reactive without talking about a maturity scale. One of the things that's been really useful to me is to reference the cybersecurity matrix, which was something that Sunil Yu created. And in that, he's got assets on the horizontal and the NIST functional areas on the vertical. And you can map your current capabilities to that to see where you're doing well, where you're not, where you're spending a lot of money, where you're not, where you have opportunities, where you don't. And in thinking about that, when I look at how companies evolve, I think people start in an immature space by thinking about being reactive first. So in the NIST language, we spend a lot of time in the identify and protect functional areas. We're getting up to speed with knowing what assets we have, where our data is, what our people do, where our networks are. And all of that's very reactive, but you've got to have that in place in order to get proactive. So once you've got a good basis of knowing what you have, where you have it, whether you've got the right protective controls in place, then you can start to do things with machine learning, dare I say it, artificial intelligence, to be able to start predicting where you might find things that are going wrong. You can start doing red teaming, you can start doing pen testing, you can start doing threat hunting. But unless you've got the foundational elements in place, you actually can't do those other things very well. So it's a maturity curve, and it's not something that's going to happen overnight. But the goal is actually to get to that detective responsive state, that if you just stay in the I'm going to have controls in place to protect, you're really going to suffer when the balloon goes up, and the balloon will unfortunately go up at some point. So you need to be prepared to do that responsive side by having those foundational elements in place first.
Absolutely. And you just described a tremendous amount of work and work that never ends, and as any security practitioner knows all too well. So
Yeah.
how do you go about that journey that you just described while still aligning that effort with core business objectives? What are good strategies for making sure that those outcomes can be achieved, but we're also enabling the business and aligning as necessary?
Yeah, when I talk to customers and for myself, it takes a lot of effort to work out what the business wants, because there's what the business says and then there's what the business does. And hopefully you work for a company where those things are aligned, but often they're not aligned. And as the security leader, you've got to look at what they say as well as what they do and find out what's really happening. And then you can start to align your security program behind those business objectives. So right now, one of the things everyone's dealing with is hybrid work and having people work remotely and working from home. I haven't spoken to that many organizations that feel like they've completely got their arms wrapped around that yet, either from a technology HR perspective, but also from a security perspective. Have they got the controls in the right places, doing the right things, taking care of privacy, all of those kinds of things. So right now, a business objective is how do we working in an effective secure way, line program up behind that. You may work in an organization that's doing a lot of growth, and so you might be thinking about how you align security behind mergers and acquisitions or investments or partnerships. Certainly, third-party supply is both a business opportunity and a security risk and a threat. So thinking about how you can get visibility into your supply chain helps your business move with their supply chain issues as well. So there is one, understanding what the business really wants to do and what they find important, and then seeing how your security stack and your security strategy lines up to that business is really the art of being a security leader, actually. Behind that, there can be a lot of technology controls, but the reality is that if you don't have that vision of why you're doing what you're doing, you can't bring the organization along with you. And so you've got to be really clear on, I'm doing these things because it aligns to the business and this is what the business wants. People can get behind that.
Absolutely. And that's a lot of relationship management and engagement across the organization, right? So
Yes.
what are the most frequently successful or effective approaches that you've seen across across the industry in terms of getting the right seat at the right table, knowing that you can't be in all the rooms at the same time, and that these are very diverse sets of relationships to maintain. What are some
Yep.
strategies or approaches around that relationship development aspect that you see work most frequently?
Oh, that's a super complicated question, Josh, and that is a master's thesis all on its own. Um, I think the first thing I would say is if you're a security leader or you're responsible for a security program, being very clear with your management chain on where you fit and how they think about your role is super important. And certainly if you're applying for a new leadership job, that's one of the questions you need to ask. I'm less concerned about where a security leader sits in the organization. I'm more concerned about what autonomy they have to deliver what they have to deliver, because there is no other function in an organization that needs to be both codependent and independent of the people they're working with. So you need to have the kinds of relationships where you can be a good partner and work well together, but also have the authority to come in and say, here's a risk you didn't think about. Here's my recommendation for you to deal with it, which is often an uncomfortable conversation to have. And you need to have the trust of your partners that you can have those conversations without bumping into sort of political landmines that might come along. So that's the first thing. The second thing I think is you've got to be able to get out and be with your stakeholders before there's an emotional need to be with your stakeholders. So before the incident happens, you need to build the relationships with them. So the senior security roles are less about tech and more about building those relationships, understanding the people who do it really well, understand what motivates their stakeholder partners, and again, align their security verbiage, their stories, their reason for doing security to those motivations. And then they build up the trust with those partners. And so when things do inevitably go wobbly, there's a basis for an ongoing productive relationship to be in place.
Got it. Yeah, I think it seems to always come back to the, I don't want to say basics because it's far more difficult than basic, but it's all about communication and trust building, right? In
That's right.
terms of those leadership relationships.
Hmm.
But let's look inward within security programs that CISOs and others lead. Based on everything we've talked about, the baseline security build out and alignment to good practices and industry and regulatory needs, building out the right role and relationships within an organization. What does that mean for what skills are necessary on security teams these days? So, for a security leader to be best capable at what we just described, what are you seeing and how do you think about that today?
So the first thing I'm seeing around security teams is that we all feel like we're under-resourced. We either don't have enough money or we don't have enough people. When it comes to the people side of it, you're going to need to have people on your team who are going to continue to reach for doing things in a better, more efficient way, who are curious, who learn quickly. Um, and from a leadership perspective, you need to find a way to um, encourage and direct the team without micromanaging the team. Like you can't do everyone's job for them and expect to scale at the speed and size that everybody needs the security team to do it. So you need a leadership team who trusts their organization to do the right thing the right way, that the organizational procedures and structures are in place to encourage that to happen, and then people, who, regardless of the role they're in, who are constantly looking for improvement opportunities. So you'll notice there that I didn't say anything about technical skill. I think there is a need for a technical skill for sure. And in some roles, that's a very broad generalist kind of role. And in some, it's a very deep technical specialist kind of role. regardless of the role you're in, technically, you've got to own that space. So if you're in identity management, you've got to continue to learn more about identity management because it changes a lot. If you're in vulnerability management or incident response or hacking, you've got to continue to invest in your own skill set. The company will help you, but if you don't initiate it yourself, you're going to get left behind. So we need people who are going to be self-start. I hate the term self-starters, by the way, but I'm going to use it. Self-starters, because senior leaders aren't going to be there to prod them along, because senior leaders have to be doing all this relationship building and strategic visioning and all the buzzwords that go along with that.
So what I hear you saying resonates, first of all. So let me just say that you're speaking to somebody who I think has made a bit of a leap of faith on some of these fronts, especially in hiring. But I think that's actually a really perhaps hot topic these days. Do you think that the needs in security hiring have actually changed recently? Or have they always been what we're focusing on today and we just didn't realize it until more recently?
It's an excellent question. I think they've always been this way, actually. When I look at job postings and conversations between security people and their HR and recruiting partners, it's really broken. I think one of the things we can be doing as leaders in the security function is to educate ourselves on the right way to ask for talent. I think one of the things I do say is we've had a history of security people of looking for evidence that someone can do a job before we hire them to do the job. And that's pretty, it's a reasonable thing because we're all a bunch of security people and we're trust but verify, right? It's like show me, right? But we're limiting ourselves to people who could do the job but haven't yet. And so I think we need to change our mindset to say, what does the job need? And does the candidate in front of me show the potential for being able to do that? Not does the candidate in front of me show me that they've already done that for 5 years? And I think if we change our mindset, we're going to open ourselves up to have some really excellent talent come into our teams that may not come from a traditional security background, but still blow it out of the water when it comes to doing security things. And so I'm looking for us as an industry to make that pivot. We haven't done it yet. Starting to, but we're not there yet.
I love it. Okay, we are rapidly running short on time. So what I'd like to do is wrap up with one or two additional questions here that bring us to our conclusion. So thinking about broader information security, cybersecurity, whatever we want to call it these days, what do you think is like the one or two like biggest misunderstandings or lack of understanding in our professional space?
First one is that security is a technical discipline. I think security is a business discipline with a technical solution. I am not here can do security if you don't know tech. You need to know tech. But to be able to execute really well and to achieve sustainable outcomes, you've got to understand it as a business problem first and foremost. So I think that's one of the big misunderstandings. I think the other side of it is security can be really broad. Like you could find a security reason for being in a conversation anywhere in the business. Doesn't matter what's happening in the business, there is a security impact to that decision. And I think as security professionals, we want to be everywhere. And I think we need to reset our own boundaries for our own mental health, but also to help the organization understand what security is and what it is not, and where they're responsible for things versus our own responsibilities. So I think there's misunderstandings around where the boundaries are. And that would be the second thing I would say.
Got it. And that second one in particular, what I hear you saying is that there's this need for security leaders to really step away, but then develop the right levels of trust and accountability that's shared in terms of security outcomes. Is that right?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. That's right.
Got it. Okay, so perhaps the easiest or most difficult question for last year. We'll see how it goes. But if you had a magic wand, a blank check, whatever you want to call it, and you could change one thing in our industry, what do you think it might be?
I would look to bring in more diverse people into the industry. And this is not a color of skin or a gender or an orientation question. I security for a really long time has been practiced by people with similar backgrounds. And I would really like to see security become a community-wide, and I mean sort of society-wide discipline where everybody feels like they can come in and add their 2 cents. And I think if we do that, we're actually going to be better at defending our organizations and having a much stronger security program. So wave the magic wand, more people, but more people from really different backgrounds is what I'd love to see.
I love it. And I think one of the things that I've noticed firsthand as well as a practitioner is just how well getting that right can pay off. So I fully agree. So unfortunately that we're coming up on time here. So I want to say thank you so much for being here today, sharing these insights with us, and having what was a really fun conversation. I've thoroughly enjoyed it.
Josh.
I hope our audience has as well.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us. And, thank you to our audience as well for tuning in and staying with us throughout the day today. Hopefully you've enjoyed the event, and I'll be handing this back over to Stacia to wrap us up.